What if I told you that one of the most valuable plants you can grow at home costs less than $2? A plant that can keep producing for years. A plant that can help you make naturally fizzy drinks right in your own kitchen. And one that people relied on long before supermarkets existed. 200 years ago, families didn't buy soda. They made it themselves, not because it was trendy, because it worked. Every home had simple fermentation cultures bubbling away in glass jars, turning ordinary ingredients into refreshing, sparkling drinks, using nothing more than time, water, and nature itself. Then something changed. Those old methods slowly disappeared. Today, billions of dollars are spent every year on soft drinks, while one of the simplest homemade traditions was almost forgotten. But the science never disappeared. It was simply left behind. Today, I'm going to show you how one humble plant can completely change the way you think about homemade drinks. We'll grow it, we'll turn it into a living culture, and then we'll use it to make naturally carbonated soda that you can keep producing again and again. Stay with me, because near the end, I'll show you why this simple method quietly disappeared from most homes and why it's making a comeback today. I'm Juarez. I'm 56 years old from Michoacan, Mexico, and for more than 30 years, I've studied traditional growing methods that helped families become more self-sufficient long before modern convenience took over. Let's begin. The plant is ginger. You see it every week in the grocery store. Most people treat it like nothing more than a cooking ingredient. But ginger is actually one of the easiest perennial plants you can grow. It doesn't grow from seeds, it grows from itself. Every piece of fresh rhizome contains the blueprint for an entirely new plant. Plant one piece today, months later, you'll harvest several more. Replant one section, harvest again. And the cycle continues year after year. That's why gardeners have grown ginger for thousands of years, not because it's difficult, but because once you start, you rarely need to buy it again. Growing it is surprisingly simple. Choose a fresh, organic ginger rhizome with healthy growth buds. Plant it about 2 inches deep in loose, well-drained soil inside a wide container. Keep the soil lightly moist. Place it somewhere warm with bright, indirect light. That's it. Within several weeks, green shoots begin pushing through the soil. A few months later, you can gently harvest part of the rhizome while leaving the rest growing underground. Instead of killing the plant, you simply borrow from it. Then it keeps producing. Researchers have even found that young ginger harvested around 4 to 6 months contains significantly higher antioxidant activity than older, mature roots commonly sold in stores. But growing ginger is only half of today's story. The real magic isn't hidden inside the root. It's living on the outside. Fresh organic ginger naturally carries wild yeast and beneficial bacteria on its skin, the same kinds of microorganisms responsible for sourdough bread, sauerkraut, kimchi, and countless traditional fermented foods around the world. When those microorganisms are given water, sugar, and a little patience, they wake up, they begin feeding. As they consume the sugar, they release natural carbon dioxide. That's where the bubbles come from. At the same time, they create organic acids that help preserve the drink naturally while reducing much of the original sugar. In other words, the sugar isn't there for you, it's there for the microbes. And that's one of the biggest misunderstandings people have about traditional fermentation. The finished drink isn't simply sugar water. It's a living beverage transformed by biology. The culture responsible for all of this has a simple name: a ginger bug. Despite the funny name, it's one of the oldest fermentation starters ever used by home cooks. And once it's alive, you can keep it going for years. All you need is a clean glass jar, fresh organic ginger with the skin still on, cane sugar, and chlorine-free water. Every day for about 5 to 7 days, you feed it 1 tablespoon of grated ginger, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and stir gently. Around day 3, tiny bubbles begin appearing. By day 5, the jar comes alive. You'll hear a soft fizz when you stir it. That's exactly what you want. Those bubbles are proof that millions of beneficial microorganisms are now working together. You've just created your own natural fermentation starter. And from this single jar, you can begin making naturally sparkling drinks whenever you want. But building the ginger bug is only the first step. Because next, I'll show you exactly how this living culture turns ordinary herbs, fruits, and spices into naturally fizzy homemade soda, and why the flavor is unlike anything you'll ever buy in a store. Now comes the part that surprises almost everyone. Most people assume making naturally carbonated drinks at home must be complicated. Special equipment? Expensive ingredients? A long list of complicated steps. The truth is exactly the opposite. Once your ginger bug is active, the hardest part is already finished. From this point on, you're simply giving those living microorganisms a new meal. Start by making a strong herbal or fruit infusion. Fresh ginger is the classic choice, but that's only the beginning. Mint, lemon, lime, turmeric, lavender, elderflowers, fresh berries, even herbs growing in your own backyard can become completely different sparkling drinks. Boil your chosen ingredients in water for several minutes. Then stir in sugar while the liquid is still warm until it completely dissolves. Now comes an important step. Wait, the liquid must cool to room temperature before adding your ginger bug. If it's too hot, you'll destroy the living culture instantly. Once cooled, strain out the herbs or fruit. Pour the liquid into a clean container. Then add about half a cup of active ginger bug for every half gallon of liquid. Stir gently. Now it's time to bottle it, and this is where safety matters. Always use bottles specifically designed for pressure fermentation, like flip-top brewing bottles. Natural fermentation creates real carbon dioxide. Using ordinary glass bottles can be dangerous because they aren't built to handle that pressure. Fill the bottles, seal them, and leave them at room temperature for about 2 to 3 days. Once a day, briefly open each bottle to release excess pressure. This simple habit prevents overcarbonation while allowing the drink to continue developing flavor. After 2 or 3 days, move the bottles into the refrigerator. The cold dramatically slows fermentation while preserving the natural carbonation you've created. Then comes the best part, that first pour. Tiny natural bubbles, a fresh aroma, a gentle fizz that wasn't pumped in by a factory machine, but created by living microorganisms doing exactly what they've done for thousands of years. And every batch can taste completely different. Love citrus? Add lemons and oranges. Prefer something refreshing? Try mint and lime. Want a warm, spicy flavor? Use ginger, cinnamon, and cloves. Like floral drinks, lavender or elderflower create surprisingly elegant, sparkling beverages. Your garden becomes your flavor menu. No supermarket can compete with that. Modern research has made something else very clear. Fermentation doesn't simply preserve ingredients, it transforms them. During fermentation, naturally occurring bacteria produce organic acids while changing many plant compounds into forms that may become easier for the body to absorb. Researchers studying fermented ginger have observed that some of its major bioactive compounds change during fermentation, creating a beverage that is chemically different from the original ingredients. At the same time, much of the sugar added at the beginning has already been consumed by the microorganisms themselves. That's one reason traditional fermented drinks taste very different from ordinary soft drinks. They're alive. Every batch becomes a tiny ecosystem working for you instead of against you. Of course, successful fermentation also means paying attention to cleanliness. Your jar should smell fresh, slightly yeasty, a little spicy, maybe even pleasantly sour. That's exactly what healthy fermentation smells like. If you ever see fuzzy green, black, pink, or orange mold growing on top, throw the batch away and start over. Healthy fermentation creates bubbles. Mold creates fuzz. They're easy to tell apart. Most people are surprised by how forgiving this process actually is. If your first batch doesn't become active after several days, the problem usually comes down to one of two things. Either the ginger wasn't organic, or the water still contained chlorine. Fix those two issues, and the process almost always comes to life on its own. Once your ginger bug is healthy, you no longer have just one recipe. You have a living starter that can keep making naturally sparkling drinks again, and again, and again. But here's what fascinated me most when I first learned this. If this method works so well, if families used it for generations, why did almost everyone stop doing it? The answer isn't found in your kitchen. It's found in history. And that's where things become truly fascinating. Now take a step back for a moment. Think about everything you've built. One simple plant growing in a pot, one living culture sitting quietly on your kitchen counter, and an endless supply of naturally sparkling drinks that costs only pennies to make. Not because you found some miracle product, but because you learned a process that people once considered completely normal. So why did it disappear? For hundreds of years, homemade ginger beer wasn't a specialty drink. It was everyday life. Families across Europe, Asia, and later North America kept living fermentation cultures in their kitchens, much like people kept sourdough starters. Parents passed them to their children. Neighbors shared them with neighbors. It wasn't a hobby. It was basic household knowledge. In many places, clean drinking water wasn't always available. Fermentation naturally lowered the pH of beverages, making them far safer to store than untreated water. People didn't fully understand the microbiology. They simply knew it worked. Then, the Industrial Revolution changed everything. Factories discovered they could produce drinks much faster by forcing carbon dioxide into sweetened water instead of waiting several days for natural fermentation. It was faster, more predictable, and far easier to mass produce. Little by little, homemade fermentation disappeared from everyday life. By the early 20th century, brightly colored bottled soft drinks had become symbols of progress. Advertising convinced millions of people that convenience was better than tradition. Generation after generation slowly forgot the old methods, not because they stopped working, but because almost nobody was teaching them anymore. Yet biology never changed. Wild yeast still behaves exactly the same. Beneficial bacteria still perform the same fermentation they've carried out for thousands of years. Ginger still grows the same way. Nature never abandoned the process. People simply stopped paying attention. Today, we're seeing something interesting happen. More families are growing food again. More people are baking sourdough. More gardeners are planting herbs. More home cooks are rediscovering fermentation, not because it's fashionable, but because many old ideas still make sense. Growing a little of your own food doesn't mean rejecting modern life. It simply means remembering that nature already solved many problems long before factories existed. That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned after decades of growing plants. The most valuable skills are often the simplest ones. A small garden, a healthy soil, a glass jar, a little patience. Those things don't look impressive, but together they create something incredibly powerful. And once you understand how they work, you never look at ordinary grocery store ingredients the same way again. My grandmother never talked about probiotics. She never used scientific words. She couldn't explain fermentation with laboratory terms, but she knew exactly when a ginger bug was healthy. She knew how to keep it alive. She knew how to turn simple ingredients into something special. Today, science helps explain why those traditions worked, but generations before us already understood them through experience. That knowledge deserves to be remembered. So let me leave you with one final question. If one forgotten kitchen tradition can save money, reduce waste, help you grow more of your own food, and reconnect you with skills people once considered ordinary, how many other forgotten techniques are still waiting to be rediscovered? That's exactly what this channel is about. Every week we uncover practical growing methods, traditional gardening skills, and simple techniques that still work today. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure you're subscribed because we've only scratched the surface. I'm Juarez. Thank you for spending this time with me. And remember, sometimes the most valuable discoveries aren't new at all. They're simply old ideas waiting for someone to bring them back to life.